Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our monthly Renaissance Center chat. Bishop Dwayne Debnam, pastor of the Morning Star Church, and Lady Carla is allowing me to be a part of the conversation this month. Of course, she'll be sharing also, but we're here tonight just to have a conversation as to what's happening in our country, what's happening in our world. Let me do this as we prepare to have a great time of dialogue this evening. Do me a favor. Can you just invite somebody who has questions, invite somebody who has some concerns, some weary, even perhaps some anger about what's taking place in this country over this last week or so? Because what we want to do tonight is to give them some guidance, give them some directions, help them to understand what's going on and how to navigate through this what appears to be a challenging season. So much is happening, and we want to make sure that we are a source of information, a source of encouragement, as well as a source of strength to persons in this season. Tonight we have three guests who will be sharing with us this evening. They'll be coming on. We ask them to introduce themselves in just a moment. We're so glad to have them, experts in the field, persons who are sensitive to what's going on and who are at the pulse of the people. So tonight, invite somebody, encourage them, tweet somebody, email somebody, text somebody, let them know, hey, to tune in all of our platforms tonight. We're having this necessary conversation on this evening. Amen. Let's get into it. I'm going to ask our guests tonight to introduce themselves. Of course, everyone knows Lady Carla, Bishop Robinson, Dr. Benton, and let's start. Dr. Benton, just share with people who you are, where you pastor, and why you are someone who needs to be a part of this conversation this evening.
Sure, and thank you, Bishop, for having me, inviting me into this very sacred space. My name is Byron Benton. I have the privilege of pastoring here in North Charleston, South Carolina, the Mount Moriah Missionary Baptist Church. I've been here for almost 6 years. I've been in pastoral ministry for 15 years, and I have a PhD in marriage and family therapy. And so we do a lot of work in integrating our faith with psychology and how God meets us on that journey so that we can be well and in all things prosper and be in good health. And so that's kind of me in a synopsis. And again, just thankful for being in this space with you all today.
Amen. Amen. Of course. Morning Star family is so familiar with Bishop C. Guy Robinson. Let me say Bishop C. Guy Robinson. But Bishop C. Guy, can you just share with us who you are once again?
Hello, everyone. Bishop Guy Robinson, pastor of the Tabernacle of the Lord, and grateful to have this opportunity to once again share with the Renaissance and Morning Star family, as well as friends who are joining us today.
Amen. And of course, our normal host who's allowed me to sit in her chair tonight so that she can be one who informs further and helps empower the conversation. Tell us, and who are you again?
Hello, I'm Dr. Carla Debnam, the normal host of this, but as you all have had this past year, several guest hosts. So Bishop Debnam is our guest host tonight, and I look forward to having this conversation with our fellow theologians and thought leaders in mental health.
And she said this so well. Our thought leaders, our theologians, persons who are experts, who are trained, who traffic in this arena every day is who they are. And so we're so encouraged to have them as part of this conversation this evening. Let's get right into it, because there's so much to share, so much to discuss. I guess we begin by just setting a quick tone. Last week, of course, the United States of America held its election. And as a result of the election and election results, there's so many persons whose emotions have been going on a roller coaster ride these last 7 days. For instance, persons are wondering what could happen next, what will happen. Many persons are wearied already. They're concerned. They are annoyed. They are angry. They are frustrated. Somewhat depressed. Somewhat discouraged. That once again, that America has reminded us who she is. We've always known, but they are always reminders of exactly who America is, and she's shown herself once again. And so, one of the things I want us to begin the conversation with is talking about what you all are sensing in your congregations, your peer, your groups of influence. Because one of the things that we do as pastors, as preachers, is we always need to have a pulse of our congregations, which is how we articulate the pains of the people. So, and let's have a fluid conversation. You are just jump in, we feel like it. But to talk to me, what are you all sensing is going on in the hearts and minds of people right now? And anyone just jump on in.
Well, I would say that a lot of people are concerned, and like, where do we go from here? How will they be impacted personally, but also thinking about the next generation of persons behind us, the next one, right behind us, and children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, how they will be impacted. And it doesn't matter what area of the country you're in, we're all going to be impacted in some ways. So I think that's a big thing for people. They're just all the unknown. So that's what fear and anxiety bring on people. It's really the fear of the unknown. And the thing with this is it's not unknown. So that makes it even scarier because you have an idea based upon recent history. So that I think it's like it'd be different if it was some way out history from 75 years ago or 100, but this is history within the 21st century. So
I would, in terms of my experience in light of what's happened now this time last week, um, I would I'm inclined to look at it as well. Let me first say, I think that I see I pastor a predominantly congregation people of color and teach um, in two HBCUs, and so I say that to say I believe that it would be fair to say that our history is one that is acquainted with trauma and traumatic experiences, generational. The secondary, vicarious, all of it's there. And I say that only to say that in terms of what I've been seeing in my pastoral service has been all of the trauma responses, quite frankly: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. To answer it succinctly, I see some people that are fighting. What can we do? No, this ain't right. You get some of that. I see the flight. Sometimes that's through avoidance. Sometimes I see the freeze because I talk to people who are numb. It's like, here we go again. Don't know what to do. So the responses, I guess I wouldn't say the responses have been on a continuum that I would call the trauma response continuum, because it's not a monolith, but it's been all of those. And then, fawning, just trying to make the best of it, and sometimes acquiescing to what is there. So I've seen some version of all of those, but I connect them all to a traumatological experience.
And Dr. Benton?
Yeah, and I'll make mine brief because I'm seeing exactly what's been said here. One thing I'll add is generationally, um, there's a bit of a different experience from those I'm talking with, because for some, this is their first experience of something on this level, their first investment in a national election. dealing with some of our younger people who grew up where it was normal for a person of color to be president, right? Because literally their first memory of president was a black man. Those same kids, which are my kids, quite frankly, are going to school now hearing words that are emboldened from people coming out of starch racism, right? And of course, we're here in Charleston, South Carolina, and you know the history here, and already how we are on edge because of the history of oppression, even in recent history, even in churches, Mother Emanuel, etc. And so there is this concern, right, about those who mean ill will, um, being emboldened to say things and do things, and we definitely are seeing things being said even by kids in elementary school, and so that brings a bit of despair. It brings grief because the image of America that people had in their minds, the hope, is being disassembled before their eyes. Keep in mind, so many of the things, the language that was used with a woman of color, right, Kamala Harris, and so much of that was sexism, so much of that was racism. I mean, overt, right in front of your face. So for so many who are hearing that for the first time, that's devastating. And then it's triggering for those of us who have been here a little while, right? Our own transgenerational trauma and experience. So I think it's convoluted, but also there's this conversation happening across the generations as we are experiencing this together in real time.
Well, I want to push something both of you all said. Bishop Rogers used the term traumatic experience. You used the term triggering. Now, oh, it's kind of interesting that we're using trauma with an election. Trauma was supposed to be progression, move forward. So talk to us. How do we deal with the trauma of that has been brought about as a result of this here election and the triggers that are the result of that we're going to be seeing over these next few years? The triggers of what someone is saying, the triggers of the appointments to presidential cabinets, things like that are already starting to happen. So how do persons handle what they may not have considered to be trauma, but yet when I'm hearing this is a traumatic experience. So how do we go forward with this?
Well, one of the things I'll say, I think there's a lot of things that we'll all say here, but I'll kind of lead us off by saying, number one, identify when and how you're being triggered, right? So identify that I'm feeling some ways and I need to give myself some space to deal with that. One of the things that even I'm doing personally right now is I'm accepting that I'm not going to have the emotional bandwidth that I was having before. I need to give myself time. I need to give myself space. And I need to realize that I'm not going to necessarily be able to do everything that I would like to do right now, because I need to make sure, just as the Lord that I serve slipped away and spent some time processing and sitting and being alone with God, I need to make sure that I'm doing that just so that I can self-identify where I am. If we get too focused, just doing, we may not really recognize all that we're actually absorbing. We may even be running from some of our stuff in an attempt of doing things. And so it's making sure that we're spending time to sit at the feet instead of just getting busy doing the work and then yelling at the other folk who aren't as busy doing the work and then saying, Jesus, get on my sister, she ain't doing the work. Mm-hmm. So the one thing I would say starting off is give yourself some grace, embrace grace to sit and identify when you're being triggered and what it is that is triggering you, so that then we can move forward and with that knowledge helping to inform you.
I think so. Since we're talking about that, I think it's good to even sit with that and understand perhaps what may be going on. So we're talking about trauma. Trauma is, in this case, an emotional response to an injurious experience. So this hurt, quite frankly. What did it hurt? And Dr. Benton alluded to that. It is the loss. It is the loss of hope. It is the loss of expectation. It is there's a cycle. We encouraged, rightfully so, the use of our voice. We used our voice and expressed our voice. And every time we did that with hope. Hope is expectation, what we're looking out for. And whenever expectation and experience don't measure up, it's called the expectation gap. And the expectation gap is measured in pain, and the pain is commensurate with the distance between the expectation and the actual experience. And so there's the expectation gap, there's the pain of I put my hope in this, I exercised my voice, and I had hoped that this would turn out a little better. To quote the men on the road to Emmaus, we had hoped that this would be the outcome, but the experience did not meet the expectation. And so I'm in pain. So now I'm grieving. Grief is a loss reaction. What did I lose? As Dr. Benton said, I lost the image of my hope that we would have this, that we would have this agenda, we would have this kind of sensitivity for some, that we would have a woman who looks like me, that we would meet this moment, given our history with all of the racism and issues that we have. Here we have another moment that the President Barack Hussein Obama wouldn't be the only moment, but now we can now have an intersectional moment of a woman of color and female. And so there's a whole lot of expectations that were out there that were not met. And now I'm grieving the loss of that expectation. That's the traumatic, because the traumatic event is over. The election has been decided. But after the traumatic event, there's a traumatic experience and the traumatic effects. So I'm living with the experience, and the effects are still resonating in my mind. I'm still grieving that. And it's important to be able to acknowledge that and sit with that, and not engage in avoiding or denial or even what some call spiritual bypassing. But it's so very important that we engage in this moment to say, this hurt. And I'm acknowledging that, because grief won't be denied. It'll only be acted out. and so it's important to acknowledge that. And then from there, we can begin to move into hopeful and helpful strategies and options, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good point. As you all were talking, I was thinking about dealing with disappointment. And this is something that, a lot of times we've shielded our loved ones from how that may feel. The impact of their choices and decisions might lead to disappointment. And in this case, again, hope, people had hoped that things would be different, or a new agenda could go forward. And with the disappointment, it can trigger despair and lead to depression. So we do have to be mindful of how we're feeling. Make sure we're continuing to take care of our physical needs. Take a break, like Dr. Benton said, and reflect and spend time with God, and have Him help you with your disappointment and other issues that might be coming up as a result. Because this, for some people, they've been here before. We heard that on Sunday. And so they have an experience that they don't want to see happen again. And so some people, it's new and fresh. And a lot of the young people are really hurting and confused. So this is definitely a time for us to have some kind of outreach with them, and just help them to understand things that we don't even understand. And trauma is definitely the way to explain this collective experience that we're having.
Yeah, again, I'm hearing so much revelation tonight. term was just used about grieving expectations, which is very, very interesting, because sometimes we think that if we want something and it doesn't happen, we just move on from it. But now I'm hearing that with this, we are grieving because we expected something to happen that not only didn't happen, it exploded in our face. And so there's so many emotions that come with that, and so many consequences as a result of that. What are some of the signs that people should look for to, I mean, another term was used as self-identify, because sometimes we don't realize how we look, how sad we may be, how angry we may look. What are some of the things a person needs to start looking for in not only themselves, but their loved ones who they know are being impacted by this moment, that they can make sure that they're able to keep, to receive whatever they need to keep moving forward? So what are we looking for in persons?
Well, one of the things that you want to identify are things that you used to enjoy or that gave you some sense of joy no longer doing that. So, for example, right, I'm a huge Steph Curry fan, and so one of my ways of relieving stress is I want to see him play. Right, I'm going to watch Golden State. Well, when I'm dealing more with heavy stress that's leading more to depression, anxiety, things of that nature, then even that no longer is enjoyable for me. Going for walks like some of us do, etc. Things that we do that are healthy ways of coping, you begin to lose energy for that. My engagement with my children, I love them dearly, but all of a sudden I'm really snappy, or I'm not able to really be present with them. I'm sleeping a lot. I'm tired often. Not my dietary discipline has shifted. Right now, I'm wanting to go. I don't know if y'all have Krispy Kreme up here, but we got Krispy Kreme down here. The hot lights on. Let me go ahead and get a dozen donuts, and I'm going to eat. I'm going to actually get 2 dozen. I'm going to eat one of them on my way home that nobody knows about, etc. Like there are a number of things. Like I'm going to do all these carbs, or I'm going to open that cabinet that I know nobody has on here in in our kitchen. Right, pull out some stuff. Right, and so it's all these things that are causing me to disengage from being able to feel, to be present. I'm not enjoying the things that usually give me enjoyment. I'm isolating from key relationships, because keep in mind, community is important. Having people where you can talk and own how you're feeling, how you can say, I'm mad, I'm upset, I'm disappointed. Be like, yeah, me too. It's like, oh yeah. Like there's so many people in our congregation where just talking about it, we feel better. But if I'm isolating and distancing myself, and on top of that, not finding enjoyment in things that I usually really enjoy, those are just a few signs that I'm not in the healthiest of places.
Wow.
Yeah, those are some great examples, but sometimes we may not notice it, but other people. And so if people come to you and, may make comments, and they may be observing you in a different light than you normally have, and you may not even notice the change in yourself, the change in your disposition, the change in your eating habits, even different things that you've been doing to maintain your health and your physical and your mental health. You kind of let go. But also, again, it is making sure that you're not having other things that's happening. Maybe the worry is turning into uh, unhealthy ways of expressing it. So it could be anger. Anger is appropriate, but in the right time with the right people, not at everybody. And so sometimes we just have to really look at what's happening with us. And again, if people around you that care about you notice some changes, you know, take a look at that, because they may be seeing something you can't see in yourself.
There's some comments in the chat that I'm going to try to get to and have you all respond to them also. For instance, that there's a person who's saying that they live in the deep South, and and they had to relate that this is brought back some childhood memories, and they've been posting around their home no trespassing signs. So I think this is some triggering going on there. Another person is saying that it feels like a death in the family, a gut punch. How do we respond to a person whose hurt is that deep? Is the thing we can say to them?
Yes, to answer directly, there's a lot to be said. Um, One is, again, I think what Dr. Debnam said is so important because it emphasizes the importance of community in these moments.
Mhm.
Because we don't always see our own concerns. Um, you know, it's just human nature that it's easier for me to see a speck in your eye than the beam in my own, right? That's how Jesus put it. But the psychological version of that is we don't always see our own stuff. We're not always conscious of it. And bringing that to our awareness is so key. And one of the things to be helped through is it really is an anxiety situation. It is election induced anxiety, but it is still anxiety. And so there are all kinds of grounding exercises and all kinds of things that can bring us into the present moment, to be aware of our grief. And somehow it's two levels. There's the grief of what actually happened. I didn't get what I desired to have in terms of this case, election results. But there's also the anticipatory grief of stuff that hasn't even happened yet,
Mhm.
but I'm bracing myself for these scenarios, in this case, based off of past traumatic experiences. And sorting through that is where the help and the intervention can come through to essentially, in some ways, say, this doesn't have to be that. Um, you can, there's help and there's hope. There's a whole bunch of ways you work through that are too lengthy for this situation. But the point is that anxiety is human. Anxiety happens. It's treatable. There's help and there's hope for that.
I want to switch gears just for a second because one of the byproducts of this moment is how children respond, and a lot of us, a lot of this election, we're saying it will impact our children. But while at the same time, presently, many of our children are hearing what's going on. For instance, my daughter is the teacher, my son's a teacher, and they all been saying pretty much the same thing. Their students are concerned. How do we get? I mean, young persons, adults process things differently. How do we? What do we need to do for our children? What's a parent need to do for their child in this season? Even when the parent is struggling themselves, but the child is, they have to go to school and deal with racism. Many of them may work at a Chick-fil-A or a McDonald's and may have to still deal with racism. What do we do for our children?
So one thing I'll say, and I'll kind of give an illustration. A couple months ago, I was jogging through the neighborhood, and my niece, who was at the time getting ready to be in ninth grade, she would come work out with me because she wanted to run track. On this particular day, I was a little bit ahead of her, and one of my neighbors, who has two huge German shepherds, I did not know they were out and loose, but they come running at her, probably be playful, but we don't know. And she stands still, and I hear her call my name, Uncle Beto. And I turn around, and she looks at me, because what she's looking at is how should react is going to be based on how I'm reacting.
Mm-hmm.
Children are going to respond based on how their caregivers are responding. So literally, they're going to go through their trauma, they're going to go through their pain, etc. But how they navigate that largely depends on how they're watching their parents navigate it. Then, based on how my parents are navigating this, is this a safe space where we can talk about this, where we can process through? Are they going to help me to be empowered to deal with this? If so, if that is the case, and if there is a response that is informative in a way that's not saying, hey, based on how mom and dad are reacting or how uncle's reacting, I should be freaking out right now, right? So in that moment, I turned around and I said, you're good, you're okay. And I start calmly walking back to her. She doesn't run. She doesn't freak out. By this time, the owner's coming and yelling, a few moments ago. But literally, if I would have freaked out in that moment, she's freaking out. Now, the dogs may freak out and we're in trouble. So one thing that I will say, and then I'll pass it because I know others probably want to chime in on this. But one thing I'll say is, as the caregivers, as the parents, as the pastors, as those who are being looked to by our parishioners, by our children, how we react or how we respond greatly impacts how they're going to process through this information and experience and how they're going to engage in it.
Yeah,
That's absolutely. Oh.
Yeah, no, yeah, I was gonna say that right there really captures it, because sometimes we say the children, are overreacting or doing things in an emotional way, and we feel it's an isolation, but a lot of it is based upon how they see us, respond and react to situations. And the piece that stood out for me is it a safe place for them to come have a discussion? So even if, they see you really upset, can they ask you what's going on? And can you have a conversation so that they can know how you feel about it as the caregiver, as the parent, as the adult, the trusted adult, and get a dialogue. And the idea is to bring a sense of calm and safety to them, even in the midst of distress and disappointment, and even in your distress and disappointment. Because as adults, they're looking to us for answers, and no, we don't have all the answers, but we can certainly have a conversation and do our best to calm their fears and let them know we're there for them, even in these uncertain times.
That's absolutely key. I underscore, echo, really repeat everything that's been said. And so I think it's important to send that message that grief is a part of life. We don't always get our way. We don't always get the outcome we've desired. But what becomes important is the modeling of coping strategies that are healthy and effective. Because, we can't avoid grievances or grief, things that happen, disappointment, setbacks. So the modeling of healthy coping strategies is really important. That's really the difference between how we're handling that. Coping strategies are everything. And so I think it's important that we model what disappointment looks like, even in this context, through the lens of processing emotions, then asking what can we do. There are things that we can do. The schools with which I'm affiliated, some of the things that are being released in terms of how you deal with that is you acknowledge that this is a loss, this is a disappointment, it's the loss of an idea, of an expectation. Secondly, what are some things that I can still do? Maybe there's some things that now on the federal level won't be done, but were there any issues in this process that were important to me that have grassroots or local levels of engagement in which I can engage something towards what my expectation was? how well I take care of myself, self-care, and then the faith element. I dare not leave that out. Because if I've addressed all of those elements and sat with my grief and all of that and integrated my faith into that, that is not spiritual bypassing. That is integrating my faith convictions as a part of my healthy minded coping responses and coping strategies. We saw a coping strategy, quite frankly, on January 6th. Question is not whether it's a coping strategy. The question is how effective and how healthy is it to self and others? And so that's what was modeled on January 6th. How can we model something different with how we deal with our coping, with our disappointments? That becomes essential.
And Bishop, if I could just say one more thing, this really is a unique, positive opportunity as it relates to our children. And here's why. We're able to give them a heritage and a history that now they're more readily able to receive because they identify differently with it, right? So think about it. Like, it wasn't too long ago that it was very popular to wear T-shirts that says, "I am not my ancestors," right? Which I found problematic for a number of reasons. Now what has happened is maybe you can identify a little bit, because this isn't the same. So let's talk about what our ancestors went through. Let's talk about, like, part on Sunday where I talked about our church is 132 years old. Let's talk about, right, what we've been through, because now the stage has been set to where we can hear it differently. So now for our children, there's a sense of pride and identity in our heritage, which is of resiliency and of faith and of overcoming. You have inherited that. You don't have to create this. It's already here for you. So now the ears are inclined differently because of the difficulty that has been presented. And in some ways, I think it's important that when you're going through, to look for the things that are actually positive takeaways as you're going through. This, to me, is a part of a positive takeaway, because now our children are being equipped in a way that without this trouble, they probably would not have as easily been equipped with. And so we don't want to miss this opportunity, in my opinion. One of the things that we did for the first time this Sunday after the sermon, because of course, like I'm sure all of you did, we're delving into this from our faith perspective. And so we did a handout that went out today, and everybody get tomorrow, that has different questions and things related to the sermon. And we have one for 5-year-old to 8-year-olds, another one from 9 to 12-year-olds, another one for teenagers, and then adults, so that everybody can engage in this conversation together as a family. Especially if you haven't been doing this is a new space. You need some guidance in that. So this follows along with the sermon from Sunday. And here's something we want to encourage all of you to engage in it. Then tomorrow at Bible study, we'll walk through it. And then even after that, we're going to shut down the live stream and let's just talk for a moment and see where everybody is. I think the more we help engage people in the conversation, and then the more we equip them, particularly because we do have a history and a heritage and a faith, the better off we will be at being able to figure out how we progress through this.
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I was in a conversation earlier today, and a couple of things came as a result of that. One of the things we're seeing is there's a lot of fear now. A couple of things I need y'all to process and talk about. Does our talking about it create more fear, or does our talking about it allow persons to process their fear? Because I was in a conversation with a person that said they know they need to talk about it, but they're tired of talking about it already. And so how do we move forward with this? Because the fear is there, but sometimes talking about it creates more fear, but also talking about it drains persons because they're tired of talking about it. So what's the response to that?
I think part of it, the person, and we hear this often when it's difficult conversations, people are tired of talking about it because it does touch something within them. And so if they could identify what is my trigger right here that I don't want to talk about this. And I'm a leader. If people are going to come to me and ask my thoughts and opinions, and you can always give yourself some space and some grace, but realize that this just happened last week. So I don't think we can get tired of it yet. And people have different ways of responding, and they may be in shock. So they may bring it up December 31st. Can you believe what happened? And it's like, where have you been for, 6 to 8 weeks? But this is people's responses. So um, when you're in leadership or you're the person, the go-to person in your family for information like this, you do have to take a break and do some self-care, give yourself some grace and even reflect on what is happening within you, that these conversations, as difficult as they may be, people are looking to you for at least, some support and help. Like, for instance, I heard this just about in every session that I had with people was about this. So I couldn't say, I don't want to talk about that today. I mean, that wouldn't have been right. That would have been unhealthy. That would have been, a lot of things. So, given, where we are, I think having those safe spaces, and if you're that person that's a safe space, people are going to bring it up and they want to know what's thus saith the Lord. And if we're God's representative, that's what they're really saying. What is God saying about all this? And we have to bring that spiritual perspective into the conversation as well, and also realize that this is also an a moment that we can use to connect with those outside the church, because they will be looking for some answers. And so this is also that kind of moment that we had enough trouble that people will turn back their face back to God. So it's different ways to look at it, but this is why people keep talking about it. And I know that's why some are tired of talking about it.
I think that's part of the reason why God has us in community. And I think that is part of the grace, the giftings, the skill set of conversation, be it pastoral care, counseling, psychotherapeutic counseling, just good, wise, sage counseling, is helping persons to talk about what is otherwise inexpressible, and helping persons to navigate through that conversation. We do that with each other in exchange, and to, okay, I know I need to say something, but I don't know how to say it. Well, that's where a good listening and or interventionist conversation happens. Not planting seeds in people's head, but giving them opportunity to express themselves, pointing out the hope, pointing out the help, pointing out the contradictions, bringing them to an awareness. That is why God has us in community, and that's why He's gifted certain ones of us with good pastoral care skills, good pastoral counseling skills. That's what it's for, so that we can reason together and talk through those things.
Yeah, and two things that I would add to what's been wonderfully said is it's important for everybody to have permission to be. Where you are is okay. If you don't feel like or you don't want to talk right now, that's fine. What I think is important, that everybody feels that they're not alone in this, right?
Wow.
And so one of the things that I'll often say is, well, I don't really want to talk about it. That's fine. You don't have to, but I want you to know, anytime you do, we're here. I'm here. Like, because you never know when it happens, and now all of a sudden I'm ready to talk. And this is just when people are going through period, right? I mean, grief is a part of life. It's compounded. etc. So you need to know you're not going to be forced here, because we already feel like we've been losing power and autonomy. So last thing we want to do is then make people feel like that more, where something's wrong with you because you aren't talking, or you are talking too much, or no. Look, you have permission to be. And you need to know that while you're being, you're not alone. And I'm here when you're ready to talk, we can talk. And if you're not, we'll just sit. So I think that's important. And I think, too, it's important to have the right conversations. Just because folk talking does not mean we're having the right conversation. There are a lot of conversations on social media that people need to be avoiding right now, right? Like, you need to get off that. There's some conversations on television that are just going to dig this hole deeper, because both social media and television, they want to keep you tuned in. What keeps us tuned in? Fear, anxiety, all these negative emotions. So they're going to stir this pot more and more, because the longer you watch, the more money they make. They're not there to make you feel better. They're there to keep you glued in. So it's important that you're in the right spaces with the right conversations. Am I having this conversation in order to pursue healing, in order to allow God to order my steps and direct me, to connect with healthy community? Or am I having this conversation in order to just stir up these feelings that are not going to be helpful, or a conversation for X, Y, and Z? So knowing the motive behind the conversation and the space for the conversation when you are having a conversation is very important, because the wrong conversation will not be helpful. You want to have the right kind of conversations when you're processing through these things.
That amen. That Selah. That is so critical. I couldn't be quiet. Now I feel like talking. So
Go ahead, Bishop. Go ahead.
Okay. The because sometimes our most effective moments are when we have the ministry of Job's friends at first, when we're just present, when we're just saying, "I'm here for you," and when and if and when you feel like talking, I'm here. Which ties to that second thing, because someone in the conversation said they had to disconnect themselves from social media, because there's all kinds of counsel. There's trained counsel, there's pastoral counsel, there's professional counsel, there's wise counsel. There's also what Psalm 1 calls ungodly counsel.
Mm-hmm.
And ungodly counsel leads to stagnation, from walking to standing to sitting in the seat of the scornful. And so it's regressive. And so some things have to be, it's important to say, I'm here when you want to talk, because we can have the right conversation and not the public square. Because then you get all kinds of projection and transference and all kind of stuff that's happening from casual opinion. So I think that's a critical piece to this, because we do need to talk about it. We do need to get it out. Freud called it the talking cure. And so there is something to the talking cure, that there's something curative about talking. But when, where, and how is the art and the sensitivity of this whole issue.
I want to ask a question. I don't think it's rhetorical, but I'm reading some of the comments the persons are sharing about stress. Is there any way to avoid the stress? Or is it just something we have to face and learn how to process it?
Well, stress is a normal part of life. Okay. So we have to go there. So people do a lot to avoid stress. They may take substances. They may have unhealthy relationships. All of these things are sometimes stress responses, ways to alleviate the stress. So stress is good stress and bad stress. So let's go there. So the good stress are things that we're doing to improve our bodies. That's working out, eating properly. That is putting ourselves in healthy environments, and even learning spaces where we're growing our minds and thoughts, and stretching our mindset and shifting our emotional intelligence. This is stress, because maybe you aren't there and you're trying to get there. So those are some good things that can be stressful. So some of the negative stress could be our environment, could be, again, like Dr. Benton said, was, the television or the conversations we're having and who we're having them with. And we have some of the ways to work around that stress are knowing your limits. And we've said this all evening. It's okay to not have certain conversations and discussions that may cause you stress. It's okay. And I was reminded of this, Bishop Robinson, last month. It's okay to take a minute. We need 90 seconds, right? We might need 2 minutes, 5 before we respond. So we don't always have to respond to our triggers when we are pressed in those stress point areas. And we all have our areas where this stresses me out, and we have to find a way to decompress. But no, stress is going to be here. It's just how we have to learn how to respond to it in a healthy way.
I know that the conversation has gone so fast. I know we have to get ready to close up. I do want y'all to have some closing comments and answer this question in your closing comments. Dr. Benton, Bishop Robinson, your pastors, Dr. Debnam, your first lady of a church, and pastors and church leaders have to also address their own issues in the midst of trying to be everything for everybody else. What's your word for our leaders, our pastors, first ladies who are trying to guide persons through this moment when you yourself are trying to figure it out? And so if you can try to answer that and share your closing comments at the same time.
Yeah, well, I'll say personally, what I remind myself of is that I'm a follower of Jesus and I'm not Jesus. What that means is the best demonstration I can give my congregation is that I am the embodiment of humanity following divinity. Therefore, just like with my kids, I need to know where I am and in ways that can be healthy, communicate that, right? So everybody knows, like I'm adamant about it. Like I'm in therapy for life. Why? Because I deal with so much trauma, even if it's not within my own being, but vicarious trauma from walking with others in so much pain that I want to proactively be processing through that with someone who can walk with me and help with that, who can make sure and hold me accountable to my self-care plan, where I can fully show up in that space, not as pastor, not as doctor, the Reverend Dr. Byron L. Benton, but I can show up there as Beto, right? I can show up there and what folk only know me by if they grew up with me back in Greensboro, North Carolina, and see, and it's in that place where I get to meet God, as Byron over and over and over again. And then that gives me what I need in order to be all the other things: husband, father, pastor, community leader, etc. But my concern is in just knowing me. If I don't keep that humanity in check and know where I am in that journey, then inevitably I am making my way to a crisis that is soon to come, that I don't even see coming because I'm not conscious enough of it, because I'm too busy trying to be Jesus instead of follow Jesus and point others in the direction of the cross.
Bishop Robinson and then Dr. Debnam. We'll close.
Everything Dr. Benton just said succinctly. That piece of doing self-care is so very important for us as leaders. Self-care is not selfish. It's not self-absorption. There's a distinction that it means actually it's an ethical responsibility, that if I am going to be the most effective leader I can be to those I am called to be, to help, then I have to be in the best version of myself so that I do no harm. And so even self-care has a communal element to it. Just on a familial level. If I'm going to need a moment, I'm thinking of myself growing up. We can analyze this later. But growing up, if my mom said, "Give me a minute," what she was saying is, "I need some time." And that meant, Guy, stop banging on the piano. Clay, stop turning up all the noise in the house on the radio. Toy, stop yelling through the house. We just need to give mom this 1 minute or this 1 hour nap. That's her self-care. But because we're in community, there was accountability for everyone. And so it's important for pastors to be able to say to our people that, as Dr. Ben said, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I'm still trying to be like him. Moreover, even Jesus separated himself from the crowd when he visited us. And even Jesus had 18 silent years and so of development. And so I'm growing too, and let me have this moment. So I think it's very important that we model self-care, so that not for selfish reasons and not for self-absorption, but so that we are the best form of servant leaders that we can possibly be.
Yes, that I agree with all of the above. And if we're walking alongside each other in ministry and we see our brother or sister, falling by the wayside, that I would say it's okay for us to reach out and try to assist them back on track. But self-care is number one, and having friends that you can trust and rely on and talk. So community and self-care.
This has been a fruitful and impactful conversation. I know we didn't get to all the questions, even in the chat, but I think we've helped persons to at least begin the journey through. There'll be so many opportunities in the next few weeks, months, years for us to really continue the conversation and bring wholeness and strength to our community. So I encourage everyone, as has been articulated so well tonight, continue having the conversations. Share with persons, talk about what's going on with you, get some self-care, and most importantly, stay in tune with Jesus. And Jesus will do what he's promised he would do, and there's nothing to never leave you nor forsake you. Thank you all for sharing with us tonight. It has been wonderful. So thank you all for all those who are our website, YouTube, Facebook for sharing with us tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you to our panelists for valuing yourself and your time. God bless you all. Thank you. Take care. See you real soon.